Announcement. Hey, stewards, we got some big news for our Patreon.
We are now going to be doing exclusive Q&As that are only coming from our Patreon subscribers. So if you've had a burning question for us to answer live on the pod, get onto our Patreon. You can drop your question right in the messaging board, and select questions will be answered directly on air from the podcast. So make sure you get onto our Patreon, subscribe,
right.
Drop those questions in there, and we will answer them on the pod.
Yes.
We love you, stewards. Let's get into it. Welcome to Good Service. We are your hosts, Ben Chung.
And Kevin's up.
Each week, we'll be bringing you real, raw, and vulnerable talks about life, faith, and everything in between, and always over a fire meal.
Pull up a chair. Let's eat.
Folks, welcome back to another episode of Good Service. We are your hosts, Ben
and Kevin.
And today we have a very special guest. We have President and General Counsel of Child and Parental Rights Campaign, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, public interest law firm whose mission is to defend the well-being of children and the rights of parents against the harms caused by gender identity ideology. At its core, it is a campaign waged in the legal system, the legislative arena, and the local community that seeks to protect the following basic rights of children and parents. We have Vernadette Broyles in the pod.
Yeah, let's go.
Vernadette, awesome. Welcome to the pod. Before we get into today's conversation, which is gonna be a heavy one, but today we are enjoying a meal from Maui Chicken Poke, which is a local Hawaiian food establishment here in Gardena, California. And today we have this is their steak plate. We got their teriyaki chicken. We got their garlic shrimp and their salmon plate.
Yes.
So shout out to Maui Chicken Poke. And so today, as I was prepping for today's pod, I was doing some homework, doing some research, and I just felt like heavy. Like I just felt this like heaviness. I'm like, this is a kind of a heavy topic that we're about to get into. And so as I was praying for you, and I always ask the Lord, like, what is the question that you want to start off getting us like in a direction, And as I was praying, I was kind of sitting there silently, and the word protection kept coming up. The word protection kept coming up. So I feel like when we think of the word protect, we often, it has like a good tone to it. It has a positive connotation to protect. But I think in this day and age, the way that people define protection, it almost becomes subjective. Like to protect however you feel is a good way to protect. And so as I got the word protection, I just kept praying. I was like, God, what do you want us to talk about in terms of protecting? And then I just kind of thought about like, how does God define protection? So I feel like the question is, what does it mean to protect well? What does it mean to protect well? And I know it's never shallow. That first bite reflection question is never shallow. Bro. God is not shallow. So let's take a second to just marinate on that, and then I'm gonna grab a bite of I'm gonna go for the garlic shrimp.
Yep. We're gonna do our first bite together before we jump in that question.
Okay,
yeah, she's about to go.
Let me go.
Oh yeah, I already started. Let's take a bite. We'll do a little reflection on the bite, and then we'll. She's ready though. All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
You did the shrimp, or what'd you do?
I did the shrimp. Am I weird? I eat the whole shrimp. Like
no. That's normal,
the
man.
tail and everything. I do
yeah.
That's
the best way.
That's not good. That's not right.
It's not right. I don't know.
What? What do you mean?
So much
this is gonna mess you up.
There's like flavor in the shell, like in the tail. I don't know.
Yeah.
Good garlic shrimp.
Yep. Salmon's fire. Shout out Maui. Delicious.
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 Yeah. All right.
Bernadette, you were chomping already. I saw her trying to go.
You're ready to go.
The first thing that came to mind to protect well, you have to value accurately. If you don't assign an accurate value,
that's right,
to something, you won't protect it well. You won't protect it adequately.
Wow.
When you undervalue, you don't protect at all.
Right.
So what we're talking about valuing our children, our young people, our future, our next generation. We live in a me-centric society. So unfortunately, because of that, we sort of overvalue our desires, our whims, our whatever. And one of the reasons that parents are having a hard time now defending their parental rights, I think, is that we undervalued those rights. And the more that we outsourced our children to others and outsourced our authority over our children to others, we undervalued that our authority, our rights, our responsibilities, and ultimately what that means is we undervalued the value of our children.
Wow, yeah.
And of our families. Appreciating that truly our children, like literally our species dies out. Our entire culture dies out. That means we're undervaluing even our culture, our nation, when we undervalue our children. So I think that's a big part of it, is getting back to valuing what is the family? What is the family? It is the basic building block of the organism called the nation of any nation. The family is the cell. Yeah. If the cells in your body begin to rupture and are invaded, well, that's what sickness is. It invades, and a virus that invades the cell, and your body would literally fall apart or falls into sickness when the cells are invaded, and that's what's happening right now in our schools with our children. There is a sick mindset that has invaded our children, invading our families, and it's called the lie of that you can be born in the wrong body. The lie of transgenderism, gender identity ideology. Yeah. So I'll that's how I'll kind of start answering this question that you've thrown out.
Right off the gun, bro.
Yeah, I mean, so before we even started recording, I told Vernadette, like, admittedly, I'm the dummy in the room. Like, I'm not a parent.
Okay.
I don't have children, and I hear about this topic, you know, whatever I find on social media, and you know, what I overhear from conversations from other people. Sure. And I'm sure I'm not the only person out there who's like not very educated on this topic. So could we get a little bit more, maybe just enlighten us on like what is actually happening in the school systems? What are parents now having to combat as far as making sure that their children are being protected from being taught things that they themselves would not want their kids to be exposed to? So like, what is the problem? What's going on right now?
Yeah, we're really keeping the disease analogy. Where it metastasized was through the government, the federal government, under the Obama administration. This is not political. I'm just giving facts. Facts are stubborn things. They are what they are. Under the Obama administration in 2015-16, the Department of Education began to put out guidance letters to school districts and insisting that Title IX was the civil rights law that was passed largely to protect girls and make sure that girls had equal opportunities in education in 1972. And so it was passed to prohibit discrimination based on sex in the education arena in every aspect. Right. Well, in around 2015-16, the administration then began to put out guidance to say, Title IX now is prohibiting discrimination based on gender identity and began to supplant sex with gender identity or add it onto. The problem is that sex and gender identity are like matter and antimatter. And in truth, the right language is not even gender identity, because that doesn't even have meaning. Gender really is a made-up term that was supposed to describe language. In Spanish, you have the female and the male gender, right?
Yeah.
And activists took that term and tried to make it as a substitute for sex. We're talking about sexual identity. How do you identify yourself from a sexual being? And so the problem is that when you add on gender, sexual identity onto sex, they cancel each other. What's the taxonomy that's gonna control us? Is it our sex, which is concrete and knowable, or is it this made of concept that only the person knows inside themselves, their gender identity? And so when the administration started to tell schools, no, you've got to now start to endorse and affirm every child's gender identity as soon as they profess it. You can't question it. You're a girl, want to be treated like a boy, you've just got to affirm it, period, end of story. And otherwise you just might be violating Title IX. That's when it exploded on our scene. It just literally went from almost unheard of. 10 years ago we weren't dealing with this until now. It's everywhere. Yeah. But then we saw that that social media and the internet, this began to proliferate all over social media. Now you have influencers, you have individuals, you have websites that are proselytizing. This thing really is more like an alternative religion because the belief in it is so strong, and it really has no medical scientific basis for. There's no part of the body that is a gender identity. It's a mental perception, and it's not been studied very well. So it's more that it's a belief. It's a belief system. It's a worldview. And now on the internet, you have influencers purposely trying to evangelize young people and children. And the way they do it is in many ways trying to mimic, the Jewish and the Christian faith by sowing seeds and asking, are you sure you're born in the right body? Are you sure that God said?
Wow, come on.
Right.
It sows the seed of a doubt.
Right.
A doubt that goes to the core of their being. And so kids they begin to question, maybe I was born in the wrong body, when they begin to go through the natural processes of puberty, which is a time for everyone of great turmoil, change. For girls, it's scary. You're getting your period. Ick. It hurt. It's painful. So the normal process of pubertal change and turmoil is becoming pathologized and a catalyst to cause children to question their basic biological makeup. And we now have an explosion of what is often called teenage onset gender dysphoria, where the numbers are not even clear because they're not studying they're not quantifying it well, but anywhere to as much as 10% of the younger generation questioning the basics of their biological reality.
And I gotta say, because Ben said something as we got into this conversation, was that I'm the dummy in the room learning, right? And the thing is, like, that's how little information's out there.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Like, it really is. And like, because we stay in our lanes, right? Like, we stick to what we know. We stick to the world that we're a part of, right? And I think one of the craziest moments I had, because I have 2 sons, right? I've talked on this show about my fatherhood and what it means to be a dad for me. We've talked about that on the show a few times. What's crazy is usually when it comes to polarizing ideals, I stay away from it because I'm one of those guys that always wanted to stand in a place where people felt warm to approach me, to be honest. Like that's, and the truth is when this first came out.
You are kind of a big teddy bear.
Thank you. So, so I remember thinking, I remember maybe like a decade ago when this started like coming out here and there, I would see people tag their socials with he, him, she, her. Like, I thought it was like super harmless, to be honest, like cause I didn't know. And I remember like, do I need to put that on my social tag? I remember like I was thinking about things like this because I was like, is this like a thing? Like, do I have to do this now? And like, when did I have to
I felt the same. I'm like, I felt pressured.
Yeah, I felt like hella pressured. I was like, yo, I have to self-identify my gender. Like, I'm like, I didn't even know what that means, right? And because I didn't grow up in any of this, right? And so what was interesting is I remember that confusion. It was happening. People were doing it left and right, just joining this conversation of gender. And I was seeing it. But naturally, as someone that is neutral or not being too overly polarizing, you just kept trying to stay out of the way. That's the truth. You're like, I'm going to stay out of this conversation. I'm going to stay out of the way. Even as a parent, I was like, I'm going to stay out of it because it doesn't affect me. It almost feels like a war that's in another country. So I'm just going to ignore it. I'm going to allow it to be there.
Right.
And I kept staying out of the way. And then finally, when I started seeing the news and how it affected children, and I'm talking like under 12 years old, under like my age, like my kids are 5 and 8. I'm talking like children where adults are talking to them about things that they should not be doing at an age so young. And I'm like, okay, hold on.
Yeah.
Now, whatever that war was is now at my door.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so all of a sudden, man, you know what I mean? And so, we're talking about the topic of protecting well. It's so confusing when like war comes to your door. Because now you have to take a position.
Yeah.
If you don't take a position, like, where are you really setting your morals? Where are you really sitting with God? And then it's like, you got to go back to Jesus and said, hey, they'll prosecute you. They'll persecute you because they persecute me. And so then I start thinking about these things like, oh man, I have to stand on something here.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to just be honest about my ignorance, going through that process, and just how I think it's so important even today to have this hard conversation is there's many listeners, I'm sure, that don't really think about this. What's up, stewards? Thank you guys so much for supporting good service. If you guys love what we do, then become a Patreon subscriber. As a Patreon subscriber, you get exclusive content every single week.
From Q&As to solo reflection rounds, extended episodes, spicy takes, vlogs, and so much more. You're going to find all of that exclusively on our Patreon. Log on to patreon.com/goodservice. Thank you guys so much for your support. Back to the episode.
And as we have this conversation, we of course want to make clear, we're not talking about having a war against people.
Absolutely.
Okay? Even people that promote this ideology and this agenda, I don't have a war against them at all. We're talking about taking a principled stand against a belief system. That for some people, they kind of have genuinely embraced it and somehow it just seems right to them. But objectively, it is harmful to children. All right, so let's talk about why am I saying that? Well, when a child is socially transitioned, and typically that's what we're seeing at schools. You asked about where did this all come from? Once you have the marriage between social media and the influences on social media kind of reaching out to children, marrying up with then what began to come into our schools. We had activists meeting with school board members, meeting with superintendents, and promoting this belief system on the down low. Not in public school board meetings, no, in private meetings. Wow. All kind of quietly. And millions and millions of dollars funding these organizations to quietly get this before decision makers in school districts. So you now have, for instance, the teachers union, the National Teachers Union, is all in on this idea. I mean, all out, all in. It's gospel to them. And as an example, the American School Counselors Association, all in. This ideology is a given for them. And then the idea became, well, if parents find out, parents might be against it, might have a problem with this. So we think it's good for children, but in the best interest of children, to find ways to just not let parents find out.
Wow.
Now the thought of that is mind-boggling.
Yeah.
But that's what you started seeing all over America. And then COVID hit, and parents started to see what their parents, because kids were home, right?
Yeah.
And it's on the internet, but parents started to see what they were learning and what they were hearing. And they started to clue in on a lot of things.
Wow.
Not just this, but others, but this in particular.
Wow.
And thankfully, you started to see parents pushing back. But make it clear, we're pushing back against beliefs that are harmful. People are not our enemies. So I'll leave it there because I always want to make sure we make it clear about that. Okay, so, but once we've established that baseline, those who are promoting this worldview, it is a worldview, it's changing the taxonomy of the Homo sapien species. We're no longer a species that are broken down into two subspecies, two parts of it, male, female. We're now an infinite. According to this ideology, an infinite taxonomy of whatever you want to make yourself to be. And those who are promoting this worldview and this ideology are counting on our passivity.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So they've gotten really far with our children and our young people, and in my view have done a lot of damage in the process because we've not taken the time to know what is truly happening in our schools, what is being told to our children, educating ourselves about this ideology, and then inoculating our children to be able to resist it when they encounter it. When COVID came, we all got to know about, what are the death numbers, what are the infection numbers. I mean, we all spent time on this almost every day because we were concerned about our children contracting it and ourselves, our family, right? Well, we need to have that same diligence and due diligence about this issue so that we can inoculate, protect well our children.
So even as I was thinking about, protecting well, I mean, I think you really hit it on the head, like, because identity is everything. It literally points you in life. And when you don't know your identity or when you have an identity crisis, that's when you scramble. Right? You start
lost.
to try to find ways to make sense of this thing that you don't know or that you're unsure of. And I think when I go back to like, well, how do you do anything well? Like when I think of the word well, I think good. So then it's like, what is good? Who is good? Who said that this thing is good? Well, God said it was good. So what is God? How does God assign identity to us? And how does God protect us? And when you said, you know, that question of like, are you sure? Are you sure he said that? I mean, that's literally what Satan said to Adam and Eve in the garden. Are you sure God said that? Made them just put a little droplet of doubt. And that little droplet of doubt made them actually question. Yeah, I don't know. Did he actually say that?
That's right.
And then that literally that was the fall of man.
Wow.
To question, like, well, God did this and God said it was good. So that's how, this is the order of things. And then that simple question of like, are you sure about that? Like, did he really say that? And then, you know, yeah, as kids who are not fully developed, you know, their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. So they're just in this space of like,
doing your homework.
Maybe without even realizing. But you know, like you ask them a question, they're going to question. Because kids are filled with questions. That's all they do all day long. That's ask questions, and then
they're still solidifying reality.
Because they're curious, and then when you give them all the options, well, you pick whatever you want. Like you're literally inviting somebody who is not a fully developed adult to be like, yes, run out wild in the streets, figure it out, do whatever you want. You might get hit by a car. Like, you know, we set these guidelines, you know, to protect, right? To protect well. And yeah, like as I was thinking about like, what is it to do something well? It's like, it's to do it by its original design, right?
That's it.
So yeah, I don't know. Like when I think about like, yeah, when you said like the biggest like sort of weapon is like this, I don't know, I guess, yeah, us being passive. It's because when we were talking about like, it's a sensitive topic, I don't even want to address it because I don't want to offend anybody.
That's right.
That's a true thing, right? No one wants to offend, especially in this day and age. It's like you say the wrong thing, you get canceled, and then you get deemed as this like, you know, bigot or whatever it might be. Yeah. But I'm just like, wait, but if we remain passive, it's just going to keep happening. Right. And then what, you know? And so like, but I'm glad you brought up that this is not a battle against people.
It's not.
Because it's not. Because in the question in my head is like, how would Jesus address this issue? Would he shun and would he condemn the people? No. But he would address the worldview, right? He would address the ideology. And not to say that I know how exactly he would do it, but I know that he would love the person. He always loved the person. So I'd love to, like maybe unpack that question. So, you know, if we are to love the person and love the people, how do we address the worldview in a way that is loving but stands on truth?
The way, in my view, that you can counter any strong passion is with a stronger passion.
That's good.
Okay? So I am compelled, I've really given my life to this. This is my life call. We have a law firm, we have 5 attorneys. This is all we do, what we do. And the way that I feel just a real peace about it is the way I know I am compelled to speak out is that I've come to understand that remaining quiet is complicity. It is not compassion to endorse to a child, to affirm to a child that you are something other than the sex that your body is born to be. It's not compassionate, it's actually cruel. When you understand that disengaging a child from reality in any way is setting that child up for a lifetime of heartache. Number one, to give a child infinite choices is to create anxiety disorders. We're not made for infinite choices. I believe one of the reasons why anxiety disorder and depression is rampant in our culture, I mean, it's an epidemic far worse than any virus, is I think one of the reasons is because we are removing boundaries. And when you remove boundaries, it's kind of like you have a car. Well, you have a boundary about what goes into the gas tank.
Right.
If you put water, that thing's going to break down. The boundary is that you've got the operating instruction is you put gas so that it functions. And we're telling kids, you can put whatever you want in your tank. Kool-Aid, Jamba Juice, whatever, and and it's all good, it's all fine. And
nothing against these brands, by the way.
And their cars are breaking down. Their mental health is so eroded. We're giving them way too many options. And when the ultimate option is yourself, like you can just make yourself into whatever. Oh my gosh. And then so that it's cruel to their mental health. But let's go on. So what happens? You socially transition a child. That means you begin to treat a child in appearance as if that child is the opposite sex or no sex or one of 100 and something genders, right? Then what happens, and that's where the pronouns come in.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to pause on that. The reason why we must resist this impulse to be nice and say our pronouns and so forth is because we're buying into a language-based ideology.
Yeah.
This is something that doesn't have physical reality.
Yeah.
And the only way it becomes real is by virtue of the artifice of language. So if we give this thing power, we give it creative power by allowing our mouth, life and death is in the power of the tongue, to engage in their language as if it's a thing, as if it's real. We've given this thing power.
Yeah.
So I just don't play. I say my pronouns are self-evident. Okay? So you start with that's social transitioning. That's not a benign intervention. Why? Because a child is still solidifying their reality. They're still solidifying their identity right up to age 25. That person, that young person, is now the likelihood that they will come to terms with their body, but they will come to love their body, like significantly goes down. If you leave them alone and you just let them grow up and don't affirm this thing, the likelihood that they will come to terms with their body is anywhere from 80-90%. We're altering their trajectory already just by social transitioning. So it's that the likelihood now is that they will not come to terms with their body. And then they will move on to medical changes to their body. That starts with puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones and then surgeries. And each one of these are absolutely life-changing. None of them are reversible. They're not reversible despite some claims. You're talking about interfering with your kids' pubertal development. That's what a puberty blocker does. It interferes with it. Now, puberty is a natural biological process that is a necessity for a person to enter into adulthood. For the body, to the bones, the muscles, and the brain. It affects the brain. So then when you do cross-sex hormones, your body wasn't made for estrogen, for high levels of estrogen. It just wasn't. There's all kinds of impacts, all kinds of aberrations to the physical well-being of children when you're putting them on high doses of hormones that they weren't physically created for. You're putting Kool-Aid in the gas tank. In a high percentage of time, you sterilize that child when you do this regimen. You're cutting off the ability for a child to have children someday when they reach the planet of adulthood. In my mind, that's cruel. That's cruel. Because they don't even know. They've never been to that planet. So they have no idea what they're giving up. Things that people pay tens of thousands of dollars to have a child, they're giving up as a child. That's cruel. And then you start cutting off healthy body parts while they're still children. That's cruel. So I don't like cruelty to children. And so that's why I speak up.
You put that so well. I mean, when you said when there's like a topic that people have so much passion for, to combat it is to be even more passionate about something on a deeper level. When you say the word cruelty, no one's in support of cruelty, right? Even though that word could be subjective to, right? Like, because when you talk about all these, like, you give this infinite menu of options, pick whatever you want, put whatever you want into your body, identify yourself as whatever you want to identify as, because then where's the limit then? It's now I'm hearing, children, like, I'm hearing the word furries, and like kids can identify as an animal, and it's like, well, then where's the line? Like, what can't you identify as? And then and like, you're essentially creating confusion in people. It's not even giving opportunity for confusion. It's creating confusion. And that is cruel. To intentionally confuse somebody. Like, I'm here to actually confuse you which is the enemy's, he's the deceiver, right? They call him the deceiver in the Bible. He's here to confuse you by simply asking you a question because he wants you to be confused. And the opposite of that, God says, I'm not a God of confusion, but of power, love, and a sound mind. That's right. So like, it's so, when you go even deeper, it's like, oh, you're passionate about that. Okay, then let's go even deeper into that. And cruelty is, I think, absolutely an accurate way to define that.
I think one thing I want to do to dial back a little bit on because right now, just for our listeners and for those that are watching, I know the topic is getting deep because this could be a polarizing conversation, right? And one thing I want to dial back is that the context of where we're talking about right now is people that love Jesus and love God. And the reason why I bring this up is because we're talking about battling and fighting and a war, but that type of language is not, again, reminding, it's not about people or people groups. It's literally talking about fighting these invisible principalities that are literal spiritual warfare, like actual against humanity spiritual warfare. And I take a pause to emphasize that because at the end of the day, just because we're battling and fighting, knowing when something is wrong, it still doesn't stop us from the love that Jesus have for people that has already gone down this path, that already has caused wreckage in their life. But hey, whether you're transgender, gay, whoever you are that's listening to any of this too, this conversation is for everyone, including yourself. Because not saying like, oh, you've gone down that path, now you're like deemed as the enemy or whatever. But it's literally like Jesus loves you regardless. Amen. Jesus hung out with the thieves, the robbers, the prostitutes. He hung out with the worst of the worst from back in the day. And that doesn't change in that sense. Just because we're talking about the fighting the actual principalities and, literally the enemy here, I want to really take a pause to say there is still so much love for people. That's where the passion comes from. But I do not want to shy away with, as Jesus was loving, he was also bold.
So there's very few times we see in the scripture, my reading of the scripture, that Jesus becomes angry. And one of those times was when you're talking about messing with kids. Okay, he makes a really bold statement. It's like, hang something heavy around your neck and throw yourself into the ocean. I mean, that's about as much use as I have for someone who leads a child astray. And those were the terms that he used. You see, I get it that a lot of kids, they might seem to spontaneously come to their parent and say, I really am a boy. I really am, and this is how I feel. And they feel they're genuine. They have genuine. They may have genuine distress. They may have genuine diagnosable anxiety, depression, and a high percentage, by the way, on the autism spectrum. On a high percentage had undisclosed trauma, frequently sexual trauma. It's real. What they're saying for them can be very real. However, as adults, we need to step back and say, okay, what's gotten in? What has happened to that child? I mean, when I was a teenager, I had a 42-year-old teacher who thought it'd be great to have a relationship with a teenage little girl. Okay? And as a teenager, I thought it was the greatest thing in the world that this 42-year-old teacher, who I trusted and looked up to, took interest. And I just, it was like the greatest thing. And I just wanted to go all out in that obviously very, very inappropriate and damaging relationship. But at the time, I didn't think it was damaging. I thought it was the best. Until I was old enough to realize that was abusive. And that's what's happening with this agenda. It's that it is taking advantage of children's, young people's minority, their developmental immaturity. They don't recognize when adults are lying to them, are deceiving them, are misleading them. It's almost like a Stockholm syndrome. They believe the adults in the world, especially those that they admire, until they're old enough to realize, oh my God, I was deceived. And so I talk to many detransitioners who are now in their mid-20s, 30s, 40s, and they share, why didn't someone stop me? I've mutilated my body. It didn't solve any of my problems. If anything, my problems are worse. I'm more suicidal now than ever. They want to then save, children and young people from this. So in my mind, we're talking about Jesus and loving. Jesus protects.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
And he protects well.
He does protect well. Yeah, I think, as we're talking about now, like when we encounter people, I mean, you said that it's a languaging thing, right? And death and life in the power of the tongue. So as much as, let's just say, and again, this is me kind of being ignorant here. If I'm speaking to somebody who really thinks and really feels deep down inside that they identify with this or that gender, call it. And at some point, I mean, it's going to take a great deal of talking and a great deal of conversation to like really dig back into the roots of like where something started. But you said that there are people who are going back, like what do you call it, detransitioning, like going back.
Yeah.
And
Lots.
Like, how does that happen? If it was something that was natural for them to be like, no, I was born this way, or at some point in my life, this just felt more right for me to feel like, and then if that was true, then no one would go back the other way.
That's right. Clearly, this is very clearly and obviously, this is not an innate and immutable characteristic. There is no evidence that it has a naturally occurring biological source. None. Nothing that's credible at all. And it is so fluid, how can it possibly be immutable? It's incredibly fluid, and there are too many examples of people that come back and say, and then have an understanding of its actual source. Almost inevitably, it was an aspect of social contagion, untreated trauma, childhood difficulties, autism. Again, very high autism spectrum, ADHD, all these other things that created a vulnerability for self-hatred. Because at the end of the day, what you really are hating is your body. It's this form of body dysmorphia. And so when we talk about, I'm not sure how much time we have. When we talk about, do we speak out, do we avoid? Well, part of that cost-benefit analysis is looking at the consequences by continued apathy and silence, by being intimidated. Let's look at what's happening here in California. Here we are. This is where we're having our conversation. Well, we have a law that was just recently signed by the governor here that makes it illegal for school systems to give parents notice that their kid is transitioning at school, identifying as something other than their sex, unless the minor child gives consent. That's creating a parental inversion, and that's leaving children totally vulnerable to the adults who are accessing them to further this agenda. It's immoral. Fortunately, there are a number of lawsuits that have been brought. We may be considering one ourselves to see that it's rendered unconstitutional. But even beyond that, so that's the law. We have a case right here in California, going to a hearing soon, in which a child has been removed from the custody of their parents by Child Protective Services. Why? Well, because this family believes in biological reality, and they're not willing to treat their child as if they're the opposite sex, so they're being viewed as emotionally abusive of their child. Can you imagine losing custody of your child because you failed to speak out earlier? It's not just happening in California. We are hearing of similar things in other parts of the country. I tried a case like that in Arizona, in which the young lady now is a wreck. She was taken by CPS. She was not given back, and she is now a deeply, deeply damaged, emotionally damaged young person.
Man,
so
crazy.
These are the consequences, and at some point I'd love to share how people can get involved in helping us on this case.
I mean,
talk about that.
I know.
Real quick, I gotta say this too. There's something really awesome, because I hung out with Vernadette earlier, and there's something that she shared about, because obviously as a parent, when you hear stuff like this, it freaks you out. I mean, naturally, it's just like, oh my gosh,
Sure.
There's nothing I can do. And it almost feels like there's this helplessness that starts to happen, right? Because it seems like, oh, big government, I'm one person, that's what it feels like. But there's these truths, right? And we talked about, when we brought Jesus into the conversation, we talk about truth and how if you're proactively teaching your children truth, I remember we talked about that. I thought that was such a cool way to encourage parents that are out there with, whatever situation that they're in, as they spend time with their kids, to give them that strength and foundation of what gospel teachings are, what true just parenting and here's what our family believes in are, and then giving him that strength to say, hey, I think this conversation is uncomfortable to adults to say, no, I'm going to put my hand up and have boldness, right? So I just thought it was so cool because that's something that I keep hearing over and over again from our platform and those that follow us and listen to us, just in whatever that they're doing. This is a season of boldness.
Yes.
For all of us. In whatever fields that we are battling the enemy in, it's not a time for lukewarm or passive walk in our lives. Yep. It's just not. Yep. It's a time where we need to have that boldness and step onto the stages that's been given. Even as a father, my stage is fatherhood. So in boldness, I need to teach my sons to be bold. And I thought it was super cool how you mentioned at whatever age, you can teach them that. So when they're uncomfortable having conversations with other kids or adults to say, nope, I don't want to talk about that. That's not something I'm comfortable doing. It's such a awesome thing that you could teach your kids young.
Absolutely.
As we were talking about different ways to prevent and have good conversations with your kids, I know you brought something with you. Love to see that of some of the response material that you created. Yeah. Sure.
So we realized that this issue was not going to be solved in just the courts.
Right.
It has to be encountered in the courts of public opinion, of public engagement. And the most important institution in our culture, in our society, as almost a counterweight to the governmental, institutions, is the church. The church is what brought the Civil Rights Act into being. And so we have written a resource for churches because, churches are so instrumental in the lives of most communities and families. And we've called it the Church Transgender Response Guide. Not sure, here it is. Here we go. And you made me think about it because in this guide, we not only explained some of the things we talked about here, what is this phenomenon, where is it coming from, where is it kind of really seeping into the culture and coming at our children. And then there's a lot of input for pastors. How do you protect your congregation? How do you protect your church? How do you minister to gender dysphoric kids and people amongst you? And then how do you assist parents to inoculate? We are talking about inoculating your child. You have those conversations before it comes to them somewhere else. You put so much truth in them.
For the audience with simpler verbiage, what does inoculate mean? Just a quick pause on that.
It's kind of like what a vaccine does. Right? It protects your health for when the virus comes. You've already your immune system has been bolstered, so that your immune system just kicks butt and gets rid of it.
There you go.
All right.
Got it.
And then the last part is how do you speak and train up and equip your young people to be able to protect themselves, their own immune systems are strong enough to be able to resist the lie. And one of the things we say to them, and it's in here and it's in the training that we've created, is teach your child this phrase. If any adult or any other person begins to ask them, might you have been born in the wrong body, or something along those lines, teach them to put up their cute little hand and say, stop. I don't feel safe having this conversation with you. I want to call my mom. I want to call my dad.
Yeah.
They're powerful enough to say that, and that way you just cut that thing off before that seed is sown into the ground of their heart. And we've created training materials now that is done and is available through our website for churches to be able to get trained up to know how to equip their families, how to equip their kids, their leaders, to be able to do what we're talking about, to engage and to do it with the love of God, with truth, never against humans, but against the belief system, but to be effective, to push this thing back. Because I tell you what, to protect well our families and our future, we must counter this lie. Lies kill.
Yeah.
They destroy.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to bring awareness. I mean, we were talking again before we start rolling, like what is like our objective here is, awareness is important. That's where we begin. But like, what are some other ways outside of like the materials that churches can have access to? But what are some ways, whether that's, on the ballot or ways for people to get involved to really put some action behind the awareness? What are some organizations, some tools, some tips that people can do to actually make some action happen?
Okay, sure. We could sit here for an hour and talk about that.
But
I'll just, I have a few, right? Number one, for your own family, know what's going on in your school. Know what's going on in your classroom. Ask your child. If your child gets tired of hearing about it, you've done your job. All right. And then at the moment you hear anything, any of these buzzwords, you immediately investigate and let the administration know. This is what our family believes. We actually encourage the creating of a parent notification letter that you can get on our website. It would document what our belief system is, what we allow and don't allow on this issue. At the moment that my child ever asks to be treated as something other than the biological sex, we demand to be notified within 24 hours. We do not authorize or consent to our child to ever be treated other than their biological sex. And it lays out the instructions of the parents, put it in writing so that they know, and that way they leave your family alone. On a community level, you know, there are now, because of all of this, they're now springing up all kinds of parents' organizations now, Moms for Liberty, Moms for America. They'll take dads too, but it's, you know, it's mainly moms.
Yeah.
You know, parents of RODG kids, parents for ethical care. I mean, there's a lot of parents groups. Become a part of that. Just support them. Get behind them. Show up in your school boards. Support. If you don't want to talk, support those that will.
Yeah.
Okay, because it's scary.
good.
It's scary to get up there and talk.
That's good.
You know, stand with them. Oh, find out what's going on in your libraries. The stuff that they're putting in our libraries are so awful that if we were to read it out loud in a school board meeting, they would have us stop.
Wow.
And yet our children are looking at these things.
Wow.
And then one other thing, obviously, I don't want to get political, but governmentally, we have the responsibility to determine our government. So make the litmus test of how are you going to protect our children? Your number one litmus test for those you're going to hire as your governmental leaders. On a more direct basis, here in California, we would love to have the support of people for this particular case and other cases that we are defending parental rights in the courts. You know, we do this pro bono. And so we do it with the support of good people who care about these things. So we do have a Give, Send, Go campaign for this California case. You check us out on X, and our handle is CPRC_official. The campaign, the Give, Send, Go campaign is pinned on there. Check us out, follow us, share it with others. And, you know, your audience, they can't go into court with me or with us, with our team. But their support is their voice, okay? The Supreme Court actually held that. Your finance or your dollars actually is speech, and it's protected speech. How you choose to use your resources is your voice, and you can empower, you can add your voice to our voices who are going in, and we are fighting battles for these families. And so we would love to have you join, your audience join the campaign in some way. Awesome. And I think you're going to pin our different social media handles.
Yeah, we'll tag all the social accounts for sure for people to follow and to do some more research. One final question that we ask every single one of our guests. So we frequent these amazing restaurants. Shout out Maui Chicken and Poke for this amazing meal today. But we go to these restaurants because they provide good, nourishing food and a good experience, which involves good service. But the words good and service can mean different things to different people. So what does good service mean to you, Vernadette?
Good service means that you honor the person that you're serving. Good service comes out of a heart of honor. Mm-hmm. I so honor the parents that I have the privilege to serve. They have suffered so much. One little girl attempted suicide at school in one of our cases. Another little girl was sex trafficked after she ran away. I mean, this is real. And it's my privilege to serve them, and I honor them. That's what service means to me, that you honor the object of your service.
That's good. That's really good. Yeah, a good friend of ours just recently came on the pod, and he was talking about the word honor, how the proper definition as followers of Jesus is ascribing heaven's value to somebody.
That's right.
I think that frames that word in such a different light. We just think honor is to respect somebody. You know, we can kind of like bring down the meaning of that word, but like to really assign heaven's value to somebody is to truly honor the way that God would want us to feel honored, to be honored. So yeah, that's really good. Vernadette, thank you so much for spending some time with us, and we'll definitely plug all the information in the notes. So folks, if you guys are interested in following up on more of this, please follow them. And thank you guys so much for tuning into another episode of Good Service. We love you guys. See you on the next one. Peace. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you like what we're doing, make sure you like, follow, subscribe, and hit that 5-star rating, and make sure you write us a review. Follow us on all of our socials at Good Service Pod on Instagram and TikTok, and make sure you follow us on YouTube and subscribe at Good Service Podcast.
Thank you, guys.
Peace.